Okay. Should we
Let's
should we
do
go
it.
for it? All right. So yeah. So for this, or actually, before I start, is there any stuff you want to ask on the about like those scribes or the app, or do you want to get to this first and do that at the end?
Let's do that at the end. Oh, what's going on? You there?
Uh,
There we go.
there's yeah, I'm there. I'm there.
Okay, sorry. My audio cut for a second.
Uh, is it? Are you back now?
Yeah, I think
Testing,
we're good.
testing.
I think we're good now.
Okay. Do we want to start with like any issues you had in the scry, or do we want to like get to the this lesson here?
Let's do the lesson, and I have some questions at the end, but we'll do what we got first.
Let's do it that way. 'Cause it's been a while since we've
Yeah.
learned like new stuff. Okay, so everything we've done so far has been like internal to Urbit, but obviously there's some cases where you want to kind of serve files to the outside world, or get HTTP resources from the outside world. Okay,
Yeah.
so Urbit ships are sort of like hermetically sealed, but they have a couple like defined boundaries where they can kind of let things out and in. Okay, because well, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. One, it is a personal server, and some people take the view that it should just completely serve only to Urbit.
Mm-hmm.
But you can make stuff accessible to the like sort of non-Urbit world fairly easily. Um, and also there are like in order to like make applications, you do need to essentially like let your app communicate with a front end over some boundary. So we're going to look at that part more in the next lesson, but in this lesson you'll start to be able to see some of the ways that that would be
Just
doable.
from a
Okay.
terminology standpoint, is this airlock or is that airlock, or is airlock more about jets?
Airlock is just from what I can tell, it's just simply like logging into an Urbit ship using its code from some other just from some other language,
Okay.
and then basically negotiating just sending data to and from it using HTTP.
Okay. Okay.
And I guess the idea of calling it airlock it kind of makes it a little too magical. Like there's nothing magical. Like you're just sending data over HTTP in and out of your Urbit. I
Okay.
guess the idea of airlock is that when Urbit takes the data coming in, it has some like ways to parse that data and make sure it's sane and like get it typed. So it does kind of impose a little bit of a boundary there.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess that's where it comes from. The front end basically uses a JavaScript airlock. It's not called that, and someone is making sort of a standalone one, but it's essentially a JavaScript airlock,
Okay.
meaning a JavaScript program that just says, okay, here's the like address of my Urbit. Call it with this credential, and the browser will automatically save the cookie that comes back, and then your Urbit will just check for the existence of that cookie to see if you're authenticated.
Interesting. Okay.
In fact, like if I just go like right here in DevTools and I go to like applications in like Brave or Chrome, um, and I just go to here, and look at cookies for my like server, and here's like the authentication cookie.
Okay. Okay.
And this code here is like basically my Urbit just like checks the oh crap I should probably delete this. Oh no, it gives a different one every time.
I was gonna say,
Someone
is
wouldn't be
that
able to
bad to
replay
show?
that.
Okay.
No, that's not the code. It makes a different one every time I check that. So
Okay.
I'll go ahead after this lesson and like delete my cookies and log in. In fact, I could just like do that right now, but I'll do it after.
Okay.
So, but that like essentially right there, you can basically see the quote unquote like airlock functionality there. So that kind of JavaScript interaction is more in the next lesson. In this lesson, we want to just handle three things: serving static files to the outside internet, handling dynamic inbound requests, and what the difference. Do you know the difference between like serving a static file and kind of handling like a dynamic request?
So a static file would just be like an HTML file, right? And then a dynamic request would be any kind of potential request for some specific page from you. Is that right?
Yeah. So the easy way to think of it is that when you do an HTTP request, request, in the header, it shows like, the URL they're trying to access, like
Yes.
this one I have up here, for example. And it's up to the server to decide how to interpret that URL. It has no obligation to do anything or not do anything with it. It's purely like sort of a suggestion to the server or information.
Yeah.
And serving a static file means it decides to interpret it as like a directory plus file name, which is likely what GitHub is doing right here.
Okay.
And a dynamic one would be, it just decides to, based on what's in that URL, it's going to do some computation on the back end and then return some result to you.
Okay, so that would be like the difference between going to a GeoCities site and then doing a Google search.
Yeah, exactly. And the GeoCities could change their implementation of their server at any time to like, make it interpret that URL and like do something with it.
Okay,
But
makes
it,
sense.
it doesn't. Okay, so that's like, so serving static files, you're just like, I have this file, I just want to put it up in some path, and when people type the path, any file name that does exist there, I want them to get access to it. I don't need to do, essentially, it's like a subset of the general dynamic case, and it just says, okay, if you get this like, address coming in, just serve the file that it's asking for. Don't do any additional computation.
Makes sense.
Okay, and so I think we should. So we have our example code here. We'll look at file server. Okay.
Okay.
So this one is the file. This is we're using for this lesson this thing I called Mars.hoon, using the analogy that like Urbit is Mars and we have like the outside Earth,
Right. Okay.
which I think people have. I think pretty much everyone is familiar with. So let's go to our Mars.hoon. Okay. So our on init has more going on than we've generally seen to this point.
Yeah.
And let me also open up Urbit Zod Home app file server, because I think it has an on init as well. Yeah. Um, okay. So, but let's start right here. So I'm basically pinned two faces: public file action and private file action.
Okay.
Okay. And actually, let me go ahead and just make sure these are working before we go into here. Um, Home. We should have a ton of files here. Whoa. Oh, that's right. That's not good.
Excalidraw. That's a
Yeah,
name
yeah.
right there.
The problem is it's copying my entire directory, which is wrong. Тетя Галя, откройте, пожалуйста.
It's a great language.
1 sec.
You're fine.
Uh, yeah, my wife just came back and she's ringing the doorbell to get in. Didn't have a key. Okay, so like, this is not good. I'm trying to figure out why this is happening. The problem is it's copying like my MD files and stuff in there. So this is going to be, I didn't have that. So it should be exclude. Oh, I see. Mhm. I mean, so this should be like deleted because, okay. Okay, let's try this again.
This methodology has also like saved my butt a lot. Like I am now basically saving everything that I find of value into this Gall directory and then just throwing it into
Mm,
my ships as I work, which is really fun.
yeah, it's awesome. Now I'm trying to what? I'm actually trying to figure. Wait, at Mars, so I'm doesn't like the fact that I'm starting this application. And I have it in app. Okay, awesome. Well, everything's screwed then because I actually do need to demonstrate this, and I'm trying to figure out what the hell is going on here. Gall not running Mars. You get launch activated. Failed to build, but it's not giving me an error for why it failed to build the agent.
Are you
Um.
sure it still has the same code in the underlying
Oh
directory?
wait, I see what happened. Okay. So somehow when I know what happened. I know what happened. So this is going to be a little annoying, but I have to make. It's because I changed this install script and like it was for another one. So it's going to have to be for this one because I'm doing it with example code. Sync R star. Okay, so it should be example code star. Huh. I bet this will work. So let's see if we get. Let's just delete this ship again and try it. Okay, so wait, it's not working. No such file or directory because it probably is called example code with a hat. All right. I have like different. I kind of use different configurations and different conventions in different projects, so that messes it up. Okay, so here it looks like it's working now. We put all that stuff. Yeah, this looks good. Okay, start Mars. Now let's see if we can get. All right, there we go. Everything's working. Great.
Nice.
So at least the program's working. We can close this. So it does these two actions, and let's actually okay. So then we have our state is we just I just put a a thing here that stores some knots. We'll look at it later, but this should be pretty normal. Now we go ahead here and we pass both those actions, and then we pass two more actions right here. Okay, so let's start with these file server ones. What's happening in the pass in what I have highlighted here? Ignoring the actual actions. Mm-hmm.
It's serving on the wire serve to the agent file server a poke that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So a poke, and so the poke has, as pokes do, it's going to have like a, it has this mark of file server action, and then the data, which presumably has to match up to file server action.
I want to call that out just a little bit more, so that when you use those faces there, you're like, it's just like what they did for, if you've ever looked at like the example Gall application. This is the HTTP server process, and so you kind of offboard the totality of the poke to this face that's built elsewhere.
Yes. Which face are you talking about exactly?
Public file A and private file A. Those faces.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So they just expand to these things. It's just basically a variable substitution. And it's just to make it a little cleaner so we don't have to write the whole thing there. And there also is this kind of feeling that they are like sort of real actions, so you can describe them as like, inert objects, which is a big thing in all of Hoon, and especially in Gall, describing things as kind of just these inert descriptive objects.
Yeah. Okay.
So if we look then at like the actions in serve file server, it has serve directory, which is a base path, URL base, clay base, and like public SPA. So URL base is a path, and we can look here. This is basically the path that it should match. Okay, meaning like if we go to localhost / Mars public / index.html, it should so there we go.
Okay.
All right. So what I want to, and so that's like, and the way it did that is that it matched this when it came in.
Right.
Okay. And then we have over here, we have our clay path, which is also a path, and this is the direct. Essentially, you can think of it as the directory to serve. So whenever someone types this in to the static file server and then does like fast some file name, it'll look for the file name inside this directory.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it's like really simple. I mean, I'm almost over explaining it because it's really, really straightforward. Public, yes or no. So we're saying it should be public. Notice that what I'll demonstrate is we're not logged into our ship right now, but the file still serves, which is pretty cool because it means that if you do want to, make a Gall agent that, or to just in general, you just want to poke your ship and like serve files to the outside world, it's pretty straightforward. You can, I honestly should probably just put my blog on my Urbit at this point, my public blog.
For sure. I'm gonna put my
and
resume on there. No, I'm not. That's a terrible idea. But
I mean, no. You really could. I mean, right now my blog is served basically from, like the same domain, but just a subdomain of it. So I could really just use the domain that I have linked up to my Urbit, serve a static directory, and I'm in business, and it's all backed up. I mean, really, I should do that. I should make a note to myself. I need to make a chat with myself and make this note. So first note will be to dog food and move log to Urban. Like, 'cause it's really that easy. I would just serve the directory because that's all I'm doing right now. I have it hosted on Amazon on AWS, and it just serves a directory.
Okay.
Urban's actually easier.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to poke from a Gall agent. You could also poke file server directly from the dojo.
Okay. That's interesting. But so
Well,
what would be
it's
the
just a
benefit?
normal app. So, well, the benefit would be right now, I'm writing a whole Gall agent to pass these cards. But really, all I want to do is poke file server with a file server action until it starts serving X freaking directory.
Okay. Okay.
In fact, we're going to do a little bit of live coding. And we're going to do exactly the same thing as this one, except we're going to like change this to like Mars public like 2.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's exact. So now we're just going to serve the same clay directory, but just on a different URL. Okay, so it looks like that like worked, that poke, and so live coding, and there
It
we
did
go.
it.
It worked.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So that's like that's pretty cool. Like we can go ahead and using what we know about like Gall, we can just go ahead and poke the app instead of writing a whole application, and now we're serving a directory.
And we could
So
serve
it's pretty.
Unschool like this.
Yeah, you absolutely could. I mean, as long as you have it in like kind of static JS format, it works well. Now you can do dynamic stuff too. So we'll look at that.
Okay.
Now we have the second one, which is Mars Pro. Oh, and then we have this final parameter here, which is the SPA parameter.
Yeah, what's that?
Okay. That was recently added because of a bug that I opened, which was um, like no, because let me see if it's fixed now. Because I have this as no SPA, right? Oh, it works now. Um, I wonder what happens if I change it to yes SPA to see if I'm actually interested in whether this like breaks it. Um, let's try commit home.
Oh, so this is an
Start.
interesting point right now. You had to restart it because that card isn't on init, so it's not going to get passed again.
Yeah, exactly. So it is working. Okay, so I actually don't know exactly what the SPA one. I know that it's for if your pay thing is a single page application or not. I don't know exactly what it does. I thought it was to like just serve the index file from the directory automatically, which it
Oh,
is
but it
doing
seems to be. Yeah,
now, and
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't. It's doing that, and it wasn't before, which was the bug. But it seems to do it regardless of whether I put it as an SPA or not. So who
Maybe
the
it's
hell
just a
knows?
different bug now.
I'll look into it. I'll look into it later. Now let's look at Mars Private. So this one, it redirects the login
Oh,
page.
cool. Okay.
Okay, so and all I did there is I just set this flag to no. Essentially, it's just a public boolean or Lubian. Um, so I could go here, and once I log in, it actually should redirect me because it has this redirect parameter back to Urban. Well, no, yeah, it redirects me to, but I am private.
Cute. Yeah, that's
All
cool.
right. So, you can kind of do both ways. Just like essentially just stuff for you on your ship or whatever users are mirroring it, like, or for the outside world. So we go ahead and we pass both of those to file server as pokes, and we already saw how we can poke file server directly. And if we look at the file server agent, um, which I think I had as later a kind of exercise is to like analyze the file server agent, but just as a quick preview, of course we know it'll be handled in the on poke. Here it comes in as a file server action. So we say it's a action like file server action right there, um, which is I think down here somewhere. Let's see, file server action. Okay, so right here, and so we're doing serve dir. It basically just renames, sets a alias URL base. It checks whether it's already serving it.
Mm.
Okay, and so then it'll send. So we can pretty much guess we should be able to trigger that error if we go ahead and do our file server poke again.
So it doesn't overwrite it. It gives you an error.
Correct, and it's like this is why sometimes it's useful to like look at the source if you have these kind of questions,
Right, right.
just to like see that happen. So let me go ahead and like I'll just paste exactly the same path. That is pasted way too much.
We do that
Did
all the
not want
time.
this. Yeah, it's really stupid and annoying. All right. Like
And
that, we'll
Zod's
just
like, "What'd you do? Why are you doing
yeah.
this to me?"
If Zod's gonna misbehave, I'm gonna destroy Zod. Okay, file server action. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna try to serve it again, and it's gonna say that URL already bound to this one here, which is exactly the error we see right here.
Right, right.
Okay. Otherwise, it passes our URL base to air. Okay. So with the application as file server. So essentially, this is saying, all right, we weren't already serving this path, so now we're going to tell air whenever it gets this URL base coming in,
Hmm.
forward it back to us at file server.
Okay. We forward it back to us.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
And this like right here, this is for, we'll look at this in a sec, for handling HTTP request. But basically, all this logic is to parse the incoming, like HTTP request if it's forwarded to us, and get a static file if there is one, and return it.
Okay. Makes sense. And
Okay,
that's the one
which
that's
is we can see
used in
there's
the
a
default Gall application that handle HTTP request, I think.
yeah, exactly. So, and we also, we'll look at this in a sec, but we also do two air bindings here, Mars manual and Mars managed, basically telling air that we want to listen to those and have them forwarded back to us.
Okay.
Okay. So in terms of like file server, that's like, I gave some examples of those pokes there. That's pretty much it. Like you serve them and they go up there. You can poke them from also just from the dojo. That's all there is to it.
It was throwing me that air is the one that's handling, but it's because it's handling the incoming thing. Because Iris is out, right? And air.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay.
And the way, and so like file server is literally, it's just basically a wrapper for air to handle all the logic, because there was this stupid thing happening where everyone's Go app had a lot of logic that was basically, um, subscribe to air, check for like the thing coming in. If it's
Right.
a static file, do all the, like, I mean, I can show an example of what that used to look like if he hasn't updated it, which I don't think he has. Yeah, so here's the road. So it used to look like this in the old Ford Fusion.
Yes. Yes.
People would like import all of like the JS files and CSS files, and then there would be something like handle HTTP request, and it would have like, in addition to dynamic handling, like a lot of it was just this stuff to be
Yes.
like, make a CSS response for this. So, and file server basically wrapped all of that functionality, figures out what mark it is and what type it is, and like just does all of this stuff.
That's really cool because I just stole that code from like Palfin's weather app to build a
Yeah,
tile because I had no idea what was going on. So, so
yeah, and so now you can serve static files in this way, and it's a lot
okay,
better. And if you go under the hood, and I want to have an exercise that looks into what it's doing under the hood, just in this part here,
okay,
um, like it's basically a clay scry. It's basically a clay scry, and then figuring out what the mark is in order to like convert it into a web browser acceptable file and send it back.
oh, that's a
That's
very
all.
handsome way of writing a scry there under that clay mark. Like I
Yeah,
like
so
that.
scries are just tuples, so you can write the
Yeah,
tuple in this way with like call tar. Yeah, and the even better way to write a scry is to like just make a separate gate with the scry with like whatever parameter you have incoming, and that idiom is used a lot in the code.
yeah, okay,
Um, okay, so that's pretty much those. Let's go now to like handle like calls from Earth into Mars. Okay, so file server lets us handle static resources, but we might want to respond dynamically, meaning we get Mars private, and based on some parameter it passes, or just based on how we're feeling that day, we return different things. Like there might not be a file associated. That's super common on the internet. Often I mean, even Urbit, if we look at like this thing here, um, this is like, I think done as like a dynamic request. where it just like figures out what to do from them and then returns like the right files.
That is to say, it builds the page like based on the
It
current
builds
comments and whatever was in there. Is that right?
exact.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, actually, more or less. I think the way it actually works is it just builds a generic page that has some JavaScript to call back to Urbit and yank all the stuff over that JavaScript like kind of airlock wire.
But we can imagine the other case.
You
Right.
could do
Yeah.
the other case. Yeah, you could do that. That's kind of like the 2003 internet case or like
I'm trying
2007,
to catch up,
like
man.
pre. Yeah. No, really. I mean, it's still totally legit, and lots of sites still use it because it makes sense. But that's called like that's just like normal like server side like apps where like they get the information, they do everything server side, and they return it. And then the last like 10-15 years, everything just went Ajax all the time, where you kind of have a page as a container, and then it just pulls JavaScript objects from a remote thing.
Okay.
Okay, and so main thing is we used air back in the lifecycle thing, but we'll go into it in more detail here. So we start by passing air this card to connect on Mars Dynamic. Okay,
Yep.
and this type is a note arvo. Um, And so the rest of it is like in task able air, which is in zoos.hoon.
And that's really
Um,
what the handle HTML request is doing, right? Something like that bind there. Wait, or
yeah,
file server, I
that's what
should say.
that's the file. Yeah. In
Yeah.
fact, not even just something like it. Like when you poke file server, as we saw
Yep.
in servdir, it actually creates a card and does it.
Yep. Okay. Got it.
So it's not even just like it. Like we can actually just isolate the exact line, and then it adds that path to its serving map. Right? The
Oh,
one that it
cool.
checks up
Okay.
here to see if we already have it. So all it does, literally all it does, check whether the path is there. If it is, throw an error. Otherwise, pass the card to air and then add that thing to
Update the
the
state.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's all. That's it. I actually have a typo here. Let me just
This, you know what? I get
what?
this. This makes sense to me. This is
Yeah,
earthy enough that I understand what's happening.
yeah. I mean, like it's all. This is like probably going to be one of our most straightforward lessons. There's like nothing surprising, nothing weird, and it all just like sort of just works.
Cool.
But there was like you have to do some feeling out to figure out the exact mechanics. So they pass a connect task here, which is you give it a binding an app. Binding is site path. Generally, you'll just use a null value for site, and then you do the path.
Why a null value for site?
It says match this ship.
Oh,
Okay, so like no matter what its domain is, it matches it. I think if you don't do that, then I think air kind of makes you it match the domain that's typed in.
okay.
Like you could imagine me typing in the like IP address of my server
Yeah.
or the domain. So, but generally speaking, you don't really care about that, so you'll just like match that with null and then put the path.
As long as they're
And by
reaching your
con
ship, it's fine. Like it doesn't matter.
exactly,
Okay.
by convention, Urbit paths use this like sig in front,
Hmm.
but it's not necessary. It's just a convention.
Would
Um,
you use that site for if you wanted to like, let's say you wanted to disavow all knowledge of Urbit for your professional life? You could then
mhm.
like force one site path to allow these public pages to display. But if somebody was like, well, I can prove that this is him on the Arvo network, it would not allow it if you tried to go in the other way. Is that right?
You could do that. I mean, as long as they got in one of yeah. I mean, they would they. I guess they could like. I have to look if like Urbit sends any headers back so that you could see it's being served from an
Oh,
Urbit
okay.
chip, but
Okay.
it shouldn't be immediately obvious.
By URL at
But
least you could obfuscate it.
no, you could obviously yeah,
Okay.
exactly. You could the URL is totally arbitrary. Um, okay, so this is a little bit trickier than just like file server because it has some ARM requirements, and I could show that. Well, I'll show you how to get an error actually, but basically, error requires three arms to be implemented. So it needs on poke, on arvo, and on watch. it's gonna set now on poke is straightforward. Every time like air, every time we hit these endpoints, air generates a poke.
Back to the application.
Yeah, and so in this case, the application is file server, and then in our application, we'll have our own. But
Okay.
whenever you go to it, so if I go to example like Mars, I actually forget what I made the difference between these. Oh yeah, Mars manual, Mars manage, yeah. Okay, but basically, I can go to the page, and it works. That's from the on poke. Okay, so it goes into the on poke and it passes it a vase, um, with an ID and then an inbound request. And so we go ahead and process the inbound request. You can generally ignore the ID. Okay,
Okay.
so we have that coming in here in our, and it's always and it's always going to come in on this like the mark will be handle HTTP request,
Yeah.
and then the vase will be the vase. And
Okay.
so
Okay.
you can just copy this and use it all the time. Um, and actually, when I did that, I got like a watch request on path. So I'm printing out the URL of the inbound request,
Yeah.
and so that's like Mars manual. So we do see that coming in there.
Got it.
Okay. Um, and then I have like a gate to open manual stream, or I have actually I'll show you what I use the ID for. And then if it's not that, then I make sure that the URL is Mars managed and go ahead and do this other stuff that we'll examine. Okay. So we need to implement on poke. If we don't implement on poke and it tries to like poke us with that mark, it'll throw an error because this unexpected mark will come in.
Okay. Sure.
Okay. Okay. On Arvo, air is going to send an acknowledgement that our binding worked or an error if it didn't. And of course, because that's a message coming from Arvo, that's here. And so if like our sign Arvo is air, then we just are like, air returned sign Arvo. They returned like whatever the head of the tail of the sign
Yep.
is. Okay. Which is, so air returned bound, accepted is yes, and then the binding is this.
What's the tail of that?
That's a good question. So that are, sorry, is that the head? Wait, is this the head of? No, this
Yeah.
is wait.
That's right.
This is the head. Is this like the tail of the head?
No,
So
it's the
first
other
it
way, right?
does.
It's the head of the tail. Because the head generally would be the sen e, right?
Oh wait, I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. This has nothing to do with either. Yeah, this is just the like gal and gar that say
Oh.
insert a variable. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is just saying give me the tail of the sign,
So it
which is
is the
this whole
tail.
thing.
Got it.
And
Okay.
and the head of the sign is just air.
Yep.
And
Okay.
that's like just because of sign arvos, like their first thing will be this tag. It's like a tagged union
Got it.
with the vein that it's from. Okay, if you don't put that in there, we get an error. So you have to handle the sign and like either essentially we do nothing here, but you do have to like handle it.
Got it.
On watch, this one looks weird at first. So air is going to subscribe to us, and we need to handle that subscription request, which seems really weird. Okay, so it first acknowledges that it got our thing, but then it subscribes to us. Okay.
That doesn't
So
seem so weird because if it's a dynamic page, it needs to
yeah,
know when
you're right.
Okay.
Essentially, you can use it. Essentially, lets it make like a WebSocket, or like a streaming thing that can keep passing data until you
Right.
close it.
Okay.
Okay, so it opens subscription on path HTTP response whenever a request is made, and then it leaves it after the connection is finished. Okay,
Yeah.
and anytime we want to give data on that path, like if it's like this continuously open connection, we can push data out by giving a fact on that path
Okay. From the app.
from our app. So in this one, in this app we just handle the subscription to avoid errors, but treat it as a no op. But you absolutely could, if you like subscribe to, if you told Air that like you want to listen on an address, Air will come back here. It'll subscribe on HTTP response, and we can go ahead and like pass stuff to that anytime we want to throw information onto that.
Okay. Okay.
And that's in fact that's what like for example the chat apps and stuff use in order to like constantly update it when people so there it's not like this front end app is constantly pinging the back end. The back end just like if it gets any new information like a new chat comes in on the Urbit back end, it then just pushes that information out over the wire.
Okay.
Okay. um so let me get this one. So okay, give simple payload, passes cards to Arvo, which passes them to air, which passes back to like the caller. Okay, so like we don't have to know, like Urbit and Gall never have to know about Earth. This is only air that ends up being responsible for putting these like in the right form. Okay?
Yeah.
Um so the way it works is air subscribes to our like bound app, Mars on this path, HTTP response air ID. Air pokes the app with an incoming request and mark handle HTTP response, and then the app can respond on the subscribe path with cages. So HTTP response header or HTTP response data.
Okay.
And when the app wants to be like to close the connection, it can just give a kick.
Okay.
And so we're going to look at it like an exact example of this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to navigate to Mars manual here. And this is, let's actually look at the code here to see what it does. So that's if we get a thing on HTTP response, right here. If the URL is Mars manual, I open a manual stream and pass the ID of the connection.
Yeah.
Okay. So handle open manual stream. It takes the ID. Um, it sets in our state. It sets the most recent ID to this ID.
Yeah.
Okay. I think because last ID is a unit of the knot, so it could be nothing there to
Right.
start. Um, Now what it does is ox. Do you know ox are like Urbit's word for bytes basically?
Yeah.
Okay, so we do like ox. So we're saying we're going to make some new bytes, and their content is going to be JSON to ox. And all I do here is I make just some like stupid JSON that's just like one string. Okay,
Why do you turn it to bytes?
because you need to. That's when you return data to like air, it needs to be in byte form.
Oh, okay. All right.
Or actually, even more precisely, when you return data to air, it has to be in like the form of like HTTP response headers and data.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, so basically, air is expecting um, like these like multiple facts. So if we give it an HTTP, we need to give it an HTTP response header so that it knows what kind of data is coming, and then we can go ahead and pass like the data. And we use and notice how air we opened up that subscription
Mm-hmm.
earlier. So now we're giving stuff on that subscription wire,
Right. Right.
right? So we're giving like, and it needs the like we give it on like the wire with that ID,
Yeah.
because air could have we could have multiple air connections, so it passes an ID so that it can like subscribe to all of them individually.
Right. Okay.
This is all from air's perspective, right? It's like basically making sure it can track the data that it gets back from us. So we go ahead and make this. We make some JSON, we make a response header, and then we make the response data. And this is all you can look up the format that air expects, but it basically expects like these ones: HTTP response header with with like this type of vase, um, and then HTTP response data it expects like unit bytes.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the data. So let's go to Mars manual because I want to look at one thing about it. Okay, so notice that your browser is so here's our JSON that we
Mm-hmm.
sent, and we sent it as type application JSON. Notice your browser is still loading. Close connection using HTTP stream close action. Okay, so And if we look in here, we see we get a watch request on this path from air. So it opens up like when air makes a new connection, we make it request the page again. Actually, let's refresh the page to see. So right here we can see we have two of these messages printed out.
Yep.
This will give us a third. Let's just refresh. It gives us a third. So it basically makes a new every time air loads that URL, it makes a new ID and listens on that path of HTTP response fast that ID.
So it has to keep all those open until.
It does. It does until probably it times them out at some point, or
Okay.
maybe actually that's we can actually check if we just do Mars debug bool. We can actually see what it currently has. So Wex is so sup is like incoming
Should get all three of
subscriptions.
them.
Yeah, it's got all three of them because we didn't close any of them. So that actually will pile up there. There might be something in air on the air end to like kick them after a certain amount of time. I'm not sure. But that is like a memory leak. Um, so we go like let's keep going. So we want to like inspect the app. So we're gonna check so we can check our debug and see that we set the last ID is this like most recent one that we got right here.
Yep.
Yep, this is all like pretty much as we expect. We had checked that there's a subscription from Air in the
I
SUP.
saw that.
And now we're gonna poke Mars with a Mars action, HTTP stream close yes. And so that's up here, which is basically if the last ID. Oh, actually, this is like yeah,
So you're supposed to
interesting.
handle the kicks on your end.
Yes, you're supposed. Yes, exactly. So the last ID, when we close the stream, it looks for the last ID, sets the like last ID to unit, and then kicks. Okay, so we're gonna actually look, and we're gonna see that we're down. We should be down after we do this action. We should be down to like two things in our sub. Okay, because
Yeah.
we're from three, because it's gonna should kick one of them. So let's go ahead and check out the bool, and we have only two there. Now, interestingly, this is like an example app. This probably is a bad implementation with a space leak. I probably should be storing all my open IDs for this Mars manual one, right? If I'm getting every time I get in these streams, um, and I never close them, that's bad. So I probably should be storing like some kind of stack or list of all of them that I have.
I feel like it's hard to know when to close.
Yeah. So in practice, it's actually it's actually fairly easy. So, one way you could do it is, like for example, in this app, we know we should never have two open,
Okay.
right? So one thing I could do is every time it watches me on that path, I could be like, oh, if I have anything open right now, I should close that.
But
Like I could
sorry.
handle that in my on watch. I could handle that. I probably should handle that in my on watch.
But for
We could have
for
a,
for a site that's available to multiple recipients at once, like a public site, how would you ever
that's
know when to
true. So that would
close?
be yeah. So you could most of the time you wouldn't be just like making a connection that's open like this on a public site.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
or if you were, it would be for specific reasons. But you could look at stuff coming in on the request. Like basically, you could parse the income, the like when you get. Um, Let me just think. If we get a watch request, if we get a new watch request on that path, how do we handle? It's actually a good question. Um,
Because I'm thinking
Probably you would
about
have to
like.
have.
Good. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think if you would have your own. Probably the best. I have to think of it, but probably the best way would be like the front end periodically resubscribes, or resubscribes if it finds that it's closed, and then you could like periodically kick them.
Okay. Okay. So you write that into like the Java that lives on the displayed
Yeah,
page to
yeah,
request data
exactly.
again.
To request it again, I probably would do something like that.
That way, if somebody closed their browser, you kick it and it doesn't matter. But if they didn't, you kick them and it asks for it again.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Um, So that's like so. Oh, and now we go back to here. Notice how it's not loading anymore.
Yes, yes.
So that's most of that. In general, you're not. I mean, it's good to know you have these like WebSocket options, and you keep pushing data out, so it's fully general. Generally speaking, if you want a subscription to your ship, you'll like manage it through like one of the airlock programs that we'll show like next week.
Okay.
And so it's like it's not generally necessary. And most of the time, what you want is to kick them once you handle the incoming request. Like basically, most of the time, you just want to pass them the data back and then kick them.
How do you?
But it does have these options for manually managing it. How do you what?
So suppose, let's say you had like a view counter on there. Well, that's a terrible example,
Mm-hmm.
but suppose you had something that you wanted to periodically update on the page that you're displaying. Do
Mm-hmm.
you have to keep the subscription, the watch open then, right? Or can you just pass back over
No,
the
you
wired
just have to.
air?
No, not at all, not at all. You can just pass like. So you're basically saying every time they refresh the page, it should like return like a view counter.
I'm saying if they were sitting there and you wanted to change what they were seeing while they're sitting there.
Oh, I see. I see. Just periodically
Yeah.
like send out information to them. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. You would just pass out stuff on that on that path,
Okay. Okay.
right? And then it would update.
Okay. Yes.
Right, in the same way we just pass HTTP response data, we could just pass more of that.
That does mean you have to keep the subscription open though, right?
Yeah, this is like, I mean, I can think of some cases where you would want to use this, but this is a pretty like unused case relative to the two cases of either
Sure.
hit an endpoint and get final data back, or subscribe using like Airlock.
Okay. That's
Like
fine.
those are going to cover basic. Yeah, so the managed example, most of the time you just want to return some data. Okay, so if we go to like Mars managed, does this one needs a login? And well, actually, we should look at why it needs a login. That's actually kind of important. So the Mars manual one, it didn't do any authentication. We just took the thing and then just sort of manually did all this stuff to return the headers,
Yep.
right? This one, if we go to handle HTTP request, which is what we do if it matches Mars managed. Well, actually, let's go. We call give simple payload. We import the server library up here, serve.
Mhm.
Okay, and the server library has something called app, which has give simple payload. And give simple payload, if we look at what it's taking as its inputs, um,
Just the ID, right?
it's taking the ID and
Oh.
a second and a gate.
Yeah.
Okay, so this thing here, it returns a gate, require authorization, inbound request, handle HTTP request, or and it's so we have here. So essentially, we have the second gate that takes the inbound request and the function that we want to use to handle the inbound request,
Which is itself a gate, right?
which is itself a gate. Exactly.
Okay.
So that's handle HTTP request. And once it gets all of this and like does, essentially does this stuff, it basically uses require authorization and this like inbound request and our handler function. It uses them to generate an ID. I mean, sorry, to generate data, and then it passes the data back on the ID and kicks.
Okay.
So give simple payload does all of that and kicks. In fact, because like it's good to just like see this stuff exactly. We can go to server.whom in lib. We can search for the
There it is. Yeah.
yep. Let me just wait. Sorry, not arm. I'm looking for it. Should be app. Yeah. Here's app. So give simple. Let me see. Give simple payload. Give simple payload. Here's give simple payload. And notice that it actually does. So it takes an air ID,
Mhm.
and it takes a thing of type simple payload, so we can guess that it's some kind of data structure,
Mhm.
right? It returns a list of Gall cards. Okay, so that's pretty cool because those kind of slot in perfectly with what we want to do up here.
Mhm. Mhm.
right? We want to like get at the end of all this. Ideally, we want to have Gall cards
Because we have
because we're
state above it.
getting
Yeah. Okay.
exactly, exactly. So one sec, losing my train of thought. So we take the air ID and that data structure. We're going to return Gall cards. It first goes ahead and makes a header,
Mhm.
right? So it gets a header out of the simple payload. And that's actually where I got like the idea to do all this because I just looked at how they were making these headers and then manually created it.
Okay. Cool.
Right. So I basically just copied them. Then we have a data cage, which is again the HTTP response data and puts the data from the payload inside. Then it gives the header cage and the data cage to that path, right? Exactly as we did manually
Mhm.
here. And at the end, it kicks.
Oh, so that's just close.
Exactly. And so that's why we're going to now, the other thing is we wrapped that whole thing up. So give simple payload expects an ID and a simple payload. We could have generated the simple payload manually, but I wrapped it in this thing that takes like this require authorization gate that also takes a handler gate and the inbound request. Because if you do this one, then it makes your ship be logged in.
Okay.
Okay, so it doesn't. It's really similar to what we saw earlier with file server.
It's arbitrary that you're making people log in, though, right?
It's arbitrary. I could do one where give simple payload. Let me see if there's require. I think there's one that's like similar but is like named something different, where you could basically do a public dynamic request. So there's require authorization simple, require authorization, and then give simple payload. Um, so I think if I just wanted to return it, I could just make my own handler that takes the inbound request, create my own simple payload, and return that.
I think I tracked that. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and that's like very easy to do because they have all these helper functions inside server.hoon. So here's gen. Gen basically lets you generate simple payloads. Notice how it has all these gates that cast a simple payload HTTP.
Yeah.
Okay, so pretty much all of these, what you do is it's expecting some bytes coming in, and then it puts them in a certain format.
And so you just send it the bytes. The in.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to think about how to convert something
Let's
into
we're gonna
bytes.
show we're gonna
Okay.
yeah we're gonna show it. Essentially, converting something into bytes is generally you have some kind of string, and then we basically just say make this thing into bytes, and there's some like standard functions in that inside serve.
And that could be even like code, like strings of
Yeah,
JavaScript code or
it could
something.
be strings of yeah. In fact, that's what we have. I return some JSON.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so let's actually look at how we do that. Handle HTTP request. It's a handler. It expects to have an air inbound request,
Yep.
which we can look at. They're fairly complicated, but there's helper functions for parsing them, and there's lots of examples in the various files of like people doing stuff with them. So here's air. We can go down to this is like inbound request and see what it looks like. Inbound request. Air. Okay, so it's still like a type that I have to find down here. Let me find it. Oh, here it is. Inbound request. So it basically tells us whether it's authenticated. So this is interesting. So the inbound request itself tells us whether like it was already authenticated on the Urbit side.
Hmm.
Okay. So this whole thing here of like require authorization, if we look for it, it's literally just going to be a trivial wrapper function that does a Boolean check.
Okay.
I mean, it's like clean and you can see it, but like here's require authorization. Let's look at what it does. It takes the inbound request in the handler. It returns a simple payload HTTP if
Yep.
authenticated.
You're
If
right.
it's authenticated, like do some stuff. Um, Otherwise, we're gonna get like give an error. So.
Well, otherwise it's going to redirect you, right? Isn't that what that's doing?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. Actually, it goes ahead and redirects you. So if it were, if it does it, it goes ahead and runs the handler,
Sure.
which will return a simple HTTP load. Otherwise, it runs a redirect.
Cool. That's very cool.
Okay. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. So you can kind of start to piece a lot of this stuff together, and at the end of the day, it's lots of ceremony in order to return HTTP response header and HTTP response data, which is bytes.
Okay.
Okay, so that's like the big takeaway here. They're doing all this stuff, but at the end, there's lots of convenience functions. But at the end of the day, the goal is to return a header and some bytes.
Okay.
Okay, so I go in here. I tiscom NJS format from Zoos, which is basically a thing for encoding data into JSON.
Okay.
Okay, we'll look more at JSON next week in more detail, but let's just look at what we have
I see
here. We
what
know we
you're
want to
doing
get a simple, yeah, exactly. So if we look at the inner level, this is like JSON pairs is a gate from NJS format that just takes pairs and turns them into like a JSON map.
there. Yeah. Okay.
Essentially, it's like make me an object where this thing is a key and this is the value,
Right.
right? And note, and so then it says JSON to aux serve. So let's take a look at that because you were wondering about the byte stuff. So here's JSON to aux. It takes some JSON, and then it says like return aux, encode JSON from the HTML like thing. So let's see if we have. I think there should be an HTML on. Oh, this is just in Zoos. There's like HTML with a JSON encoder.
Okay.
Okay, and so basically this just like takes it and turns it into like applicate like just JSON, like it turns it into JSON data, or just like kind of string data, and then JSON response here. It takes in some bytes and then just attaches like a header to them. It says this is JSON data.
Okay. I can
If you
track
wanted to
that
return
easily.
JavaScript code, you would just your string would just be JavaScript code that you turned into bytes, and then you would pass it in here.
Okay.
Is there a JS to aux? Let me see. There's not. I think you can just take the thing and turn it into aux. So yeah, that's all that's happening there. At the end, the key thing is it makes a simple payload of basically header and like data.
Okay.
And there's lots of examples that you kind of cargo cult from like in the various like libraries. So, and notice that this one, actually, if we go forward here, it stops loading once it loads it because the library handles doing that kick,
Right. Right.
right? So all pretty like predictable. Um, Here's Zoos defines simple payload, which is just a response header and then data. And then we looked at like lib at server.here. Okay. You can make lots of different types of responses using the tar response. So you just pass the data you want as bytes. You can generate like so. Here's just an example of making some bytes. And the only special thing about aux is that they like put the number of bytes at the front of it.
Okay. Why?
Okay, so
Why? Just
um
to let it know what it's coming, I guess.
yeah, you generally have to like put a when you return stuff in like HTTP, you have to say how many bytes long it is.
Okay.
And so I think it's just like they might as well do the work there rather than somewhere else.
Okay. Fair enough.
And also kind of let you exactly define what format your data is in. Like make sure like it's not just like binary data that it is like if it is text, like use one of the text translators.
Okay.
Um, so using air with generators, this is like kind of interesting. So if you want to just like serve something really simple, um, I made a quick generator, and this is actually a great example of like how you can use generators for stuff. Simple
Finally.
HTTP.
Just kidding.
Yeah. I mean, like it's so all I did here is your generator just has to be a type where it takes now, entropy, and vec.
Hmm.
It also needs to take, if you want to serve it as a generator, it needs to return a gate that takes whether an authorized Lubian and the request.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm pretty sure those requests are like from zoos. raw HTTP request. Uh, yeah, here it is. Here's all the HTTP stuff in Zoo. So here's the request as a method, like get, post, put, whatever, the URL, a list of headers, and optionally like bytes of data. Okay.
Yes.
So we get those coming in, and all we do here is whatever they are. We just take content. We just return a header, a simple payload HTTP with a header of content type text HTML, and then we put these into byte format like this text.
Okay. I think I see what's going on there. Yeah.
So if we want to do it, we can do. I made an action where we're going to serve a generator at a path. So let's look at what it looks like. So if we do this action, um, wait, okay. So serve gen just passed something to air, and it says like use the path that we specify.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this one like home gen dot action. So I'm like going a little bit crazy. I'm trying to remember what. Oh yeah.
Gender actions, interesting.
So it says yeah. So for this one, if you want to do serve, um, and this is like a different one. We've seen connect mostly with Arvo, right? But this is a different thing. This is serve. So
Yes.
let's take a look at air and see. Serve is binding and a generator. Okay, so let's look at generator. So binding is straightforward. We've done that a lot.
Oh,
So
generator's a
generator
type.
looks like this.
Okay.
It's a desk, a path, and like a list of arguments to pass to the gate, which we do as like null.
Okay.
Okay, so if we look at our desk is home, so it's saying you'll find the generator in desk home. And I need to open up my serve file just to show what we have here. But we have serve gen. It takes a path and then a generator path.
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna try passing it like here. Serve gen on my info, and then serve the generator myinfo.whom. Okay, so that one is this one right here, which is um, it it goes ahead. It says basically take this thing and make JSON, and then turn the JSON into bytes and make it into a response.
I guess. Okay. I'm gonna ask it. I don't know why you have two gates stacked at the top there.
Good question. Okay, the answer is like this is sort of a weird air specific thing. So
Okay.
when air calls this it's completely air specific. So when air gets this information about your generator, it goes ahead and calls the generator whenever it gets a request. It calls the generator and passes in the current like time, entropy, and beak,
Okay.
and and it returns a gate
Oh, that's
that it
weird.
then uses. Yeah, it's pretty standard, which is like basically it wants to inject this now data to you, but it
Just in
doesn't want to
case.
make this thing. It doesn't. Yeah, now you actually could. They probably could have done it by being like, you have to implement like a gate that takes like all three. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that takes five.
Mm-hmm.
That takes five. I don't know why they did it this way instead, but the result is essentially the same.
It would be a say generator otherwise, but then a say generator has like mark data that you wouldn't want.
Yeah, exactly. That's why this one was weird to me. It's like I had to figure out exactly what was going on, but it's because of the specific thing. Air expects you to. Oh, you know what the reason probably is? Is it what type of generator like has to be done as a gate that takes now
It's the
entropy back
say.
peak?
But like I say, says create a cell of say and then the gate, and then the gate creates a cell of a mark and some data. So like noun usually if you're printing them in the dojo, but then you'd have to like
So
statically
this
or at least
is
handle the mark
okay.
at the top.
So these are both these kind of generators, and I think Dojo is expecting all that like mark data.
Uh huh. Uh huh. But this
And
isn't.
whereas like right, air is like, all right, I'll also take a say generator, which is the now entropy beak.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of my result being this kind of like cask to print out,
Mm-hmm.
I want my result to be a gate that I can then use to process the incoming
That
request.
makes sense. It's kind of odd, but it makes sense.
But it's odd, but that's the reason for the
Yep.
separation, is that both the dojo and air expect say generators. They just want them to have different things they produce.
Right.
And notice that we can still use our forward runes to import stuff inside our generator, but you know that. So cool thing here is that like once we do this, we're now going to be serving up this generator, which basically just produces some JSON, and it's dynamic JSON. It's going to tell us like the name of our ship,
Funny. Yeah.
the time now, and whether we're authorized or not currently. So let's go ahead and do it. Okay. Also notice that air returned bound accepted. So when you do like link one of these say generators, air also does give you an on arvo action,
Okay.
which tells you that it like successfully connected the generator. Okay. So if you want to do something with that or wait for that to happen. So now we said it's connected to my info. So, oh, all right, generator crashed. It didn't crash over here. It's weird. Um, all right, so much for that. Nothing works. Um, now if you go to localhost, like so it should. Nest fail. All right, I have no. They honestly they kind of screw with these like periodically. So like this worked
Yeah, a couple days ago.
like a month ago. It doesn't work now. So I literally am gonna have to like go into air and like figure out why say generator at my info doesn't work. But at least Air's trying to do something with it, so that's good. The generator crashed. We did the ship and just.
It doesn't
I
like the
mean,
type that's being returned.
yeah, that seems like really weird.
Yes, it does.
I mean, I guess I could like serve a different generator there. Still dislikes it. It's not about the JavaScript, which is good, or the JSON. Anyway, no idea, man. I'll take a look.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to actually like look at the air code and figure out what's going on in Sysvane Airline 5. Sysvane Airline 537.
Why not?
Well, there's a lot of good reasons why not, but per server event, okay, request like so. Sorry, it's 587. Um. Ah. Okay. Well, here's. Okay. It's slamming a gate. Right. Now.
So that's interesting. See that vase that it has there? That looks
Yeah, it
very
looks like it's
much like the say
like a
generator.
say generator.
Uh-huh.
So it looks like I should be like put a noun right here.
Or yeah. That cuz that's how you might handle it in those are
I can just match the whole thing with a noun, right?
I
Like in that
think so.
manner. There it is. All right.
Yep.
So we can now delete
How
the to
very
do.
interesting.
Everything works. I mean, it is a cool. That's like a cool thing about Urbit. Like we just had like a system level like debug thing, and we fixed it within like less than a minute or two, just by going to like part of the source code for the vein, which is only like a freaking I don't know how long air like air's not that big. It's not that small. That's 2,000 lines. It's
It's big.
not by the standards of like only have like 8 of these, and that's the entire like core system.
Yeah,
Like
fair enough.
that's pretty freaking small. So yeah, look, it says that we're logged in true, ship Zod now. So we could actually like log out, and we could delete our whole ship, but instead of that, we will just delete our cookie. Um, delete and delete. Okay. And so now it should give us logged in false. Nope, it gives us, there it is, logged in false.
Hmm. Very interesting.
So, and that makes me more comfortable, the fact that it's like forcing me to like actually accept like the normal format for a say generator. It wasn't doing that prior. Um, so that's what we've got there. It's like, well, pretty nice. Now, the other thing is like sometimes you want to, for whatever reason, stop serving an air binding. There's lots of possible reasons, like you change the name of it, like what have you. There's a lot of them. So, um, we can go ahead and we're just going to disconnect my info. There we go. So it said disconnecting. And
That's
let's look
not
at
an
like
error
just like
message, though, right? That was
that's not it because you can see that it's like my kind of crappy custom format.
yeah.
So it's this one disconnect. I print out disconnecting at site bind.action.
Mm-hmm.
I pass on it can be any wire. I just use my same bind wire. Um, Arvo e disconnect bind.action.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so basically disconnect this path. And we get so okay, so it does that. If we browse to it, it'll give a 404. Oh right, well actually that's interesting. It doesn't give a 404 there because we weren't logged in.
Mm-hmm.
So now suddenly, but if we had, because we were actually accepting it without being logged in,
There we
yeah,
go.
now we get a nice 404. That's what we want.
I love that it says to email them.
Yeah, if you messed up your program, like email support at Platinum, like or support, let's submit a GitHub issue for this.
they,
Landscape bug
they're
report.
gonna need
Get
to think
started.
about that.
I mean, no one really is. I don't think people really abuse it. There's a lot of reasons not to. So we could do the same process to disconnect Mars manual and Mars managed. The only requirement is that our app be the one that found them. So could we disconnect through Air, through one of these Air cards? Could we disconnect our file server binding of Mars public and Mars private?
Not directly. You'd probably have to pass something to file server that would tell
Yes,
it. Yeah.
exactly, because we're not the one that does that. And in fact, they have an unserved
Okay.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
And even before going there, we can probably guess that like, unserved
Just
dir
pass this in error action.
is gonna pass that in error action. But and here it is,
There it
pass.
is.
This one it uses the URL base as its wire, and that's pretty arbitrary. Disconnect the URL base.
Yep. Totally makes sense.
Yep. So a lot of this stuff is like just boilerplate that maybe there's a better word than boilerplate. There's a lot of like actions that like Urbit makes pretty coherent and clean, and the like system level API is actually like way more sort of normal and tractable than you would expect.
And it really makes
And
sense
even
not to allow other applications to unserve other applications.
yeah, I mean it is your Urbit, so it's not completely insane to like do that, but yeah. If you really want to do that, you need to go and modify the source code for
Yeah.
file server or whatever, which is not that hard for like in terms of what it does. It's like not that big an app. It's 345 lines, and this also handles globs. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, content. It
What's a
handles.
glob?
Yeah. So they did this new thing. Do you remember when WickDev did that like 3-hour live coding video on
Yes.
YouTube? Yeah, that was him making glob, which essentially it's this thing that like you could serve a clay path, but clay paths are like revision controlled, kind of like Git, so they like track all the changes to all the files.
Yeah.
But if you have this like 10 megabyte like compiled JavaScript, like you don't really care that much about what the revision before was. You care only about like the source code that
Okay.
produced it.
Yeah.
Like this thing is like is essentially a binary. That's the output of like 100 different or 50 different JavaScript files compiled together, and you only care about tracking those files. So, long story
Okay.
short, you don't really want to track that file inside your database. And it also made OTAs take a really long time because they had to download them over AIMS and do it. So basically, he just made a thing where it would store essentially like a map of globs. Like a map of like those, it would store that binary data just as part of the app state in file server.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I
I mean, we
get
could
that.
look at right. So instead of storing it in clay, you store it in the app space, and so in the app state. So here we store path to a mime, and mime is just like kind of HTTP data
Okay.
or Unix data. Okay, so basically it's a glob of paths to mimes, and if we look at the current, we can actually inspect file server. It might be more tractable or like easier to view if we go to localhost/debug. But in order to do this, I probably have to start debug. Here we go. Now it works. Apps, file server, query the state to get everything. And we should be able to see like it's storing like that glob map. So it's like consists of Serving is a map of URL base to some type of content, and then whether it's public or single page.
Hmm.
And
Secret
content is
Player
just
Club.
a yeah, exactly. Now I think if I go to file server like the ser file, yeah, so you serve dir, it just like it marks it as clay. If you serve glob, it marks it as glob. And you have to, it's actually interesting, serve glob. You have to add the glob in some other way. So I have to look at how that works. Oh, file server doesn't use libdebug? It definitely uses libdebug. That's it's a scam. Anyway. Oh, it says it doesn't use it through. I think it's just too much data. So it crashed it and then lied to me. Um, all right, final thing here, because this is actually taking a while because this lesson has a lot of stuff in it. HTTP client to call out to Earth is Iris. Unfortunately, Iris is just simple as hell. So I just made an HTTP get action, um, which is pass a card to the I vein. It's a request. I get the. Let me just look at my get URL. Yeah, so get URL is literally just like make some like get method URL.
Hmm.
Right, because the endpoint could be post or put or whatever, right?
Sure. Yeah, I guess. Okay.
So HTTP endpoints, you like have to like this whatever server you're calling on
Yeah.
a URL will have declared internally what types of HTTP methods it accepts.
Right. Right. Them. Okay.
If that does that track?
Yeah, I'm learning about APIs slowly, but I don't have a ton of understanding. But I get it. Get means to
So
receive
there's
something. Good.
well there's like zero magic. Literally, the server just declares on this URL, I accept these types of methods,
Okay.
and then it's up to the user to like know that or publish it. And the methods are purely like kind of suggestions or like metadata. They don't like dictate what can happen. The server can do anything it wants on any methods endpoint.
Oh, weird. Okay.
Okay, so they're purely like kind of suggestions that are meant to convey meaning to like the consumers of the API, the people who are calling the API.
Okay.
Okay, so I think the main point there is like there's just literally no magic. Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
and so here we're just like I'm just calling a URL. So I'm going to call a URL, and I've just restricted myself to only calling URLs that have a get endpoint.
Okay.
Okay, and so this one I said it's get URL because I'm like making it for like a get
Right. Right.
endpoint. Okay, and then I just give it like the default like bunt value of Iris's outbound config because it requires that in the card, and I'm fine with the default. Again, we can look at if we want to examine Iris. So here, we can look at like outbound config, and it's just like it has like a default value declared here.
Oh, okay. All
So
right.
number of times I just use the bunt value. I
Yeah.
think I I think we can. Oh, yeah. So there's the bunt value is declared as that.
That's cool, and that's because that's in default agent. Is that why that's available in the dojo?
It's not because it's in default agent. It's because let's see if I can. Yeah. Does it let you declare 2.2?
But why
It's
was that
literally.
available in the dojo though? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I see your question. It's because it's in zoos.
Oh, it's in
Zoos is
Zeus. It's
it's
in Zeus.
yeah. The dojo imports zoo like the standard library.
Got it. All right. Sorry.
Yeah, great question. Because it does look weird that I can do that. So yeah, we just request this. We're gonna like paste in here. Got data from example.com. I don't say what data it is, but I did in fact get data.
That's
People are
probably as
laughing
good as
now.
any.
I mean, well, for all the haters. I printed
Oh,
I
you
got
got
data
it
from
in
it,
there now.
and in my state, I put like the full file from the response.
Let's see that. Can you do that from debug, right?
Yeah, so notice how client response. Let me just see where I did full, like where I got full file. Put my files with URL. Response is client response iris, and it includes if it's finished. So I just check whether the response says it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just get the full file out of it, which is a unit MIME data. And
Okay.
again, think of MIME data as think of it as internet data, if that makes it easiest.
Sure.
Like HTML, JSON, binary files, CSVs, whatever. There's lots of kind of declared types. So we have this, we map URL to MIME data. So I'm pretty sure the next thing I will say in the lesson is to go ahead and take a look, which is yes, we're going to
Yeah.
go take a look at the state and files. And looks like someone extracted a beautiful
Look
bundle
at
of
that.
HTML.
Fancy.
Yeah. So that's, and then you can deal with this type and parse it as you want.
Okay. Okay.
Um, is MIME data in here? Oh, here's MIME data. So it just starts with like a type and then the actual data. So type is text HTML charset UTF-8, and then here's the data.
Okay.
So
And
that's
then the
cool.
P and Q because it gives you the number of bytes and then the actual data there.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. I wonder if it, and then I think it handles Unicode fine. Oh, move permanent. Oh, interesting.
Well, that's one way of finding
Okay,
out your
so
site
this,
moved.
yeah. Um, oh, well, it's a redirect, yeah. Or actually, that's interesting. I was trying to get stuff in just like in Unicode, but they're not showing me where. Wait, it's 301 because they. Okay, so we handle it in on Arvo, coming back from Iris, which I think I already showed here. Which is just like
Makes
it gets
sense.
it's saying it's saying it's an Iris.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sign Arvo, it's from Iris, and it's an HTTP response, and we handle it. Which my handling is just to print that I got the data and put it into the state.
Sure.
Possible Iris responses. It can give us like a partial progress one, like that it was canceled, like maybe something went wrong with it, it didn't do it, or finished. Probably would want to handle both progress and finished, because it depends on how the site does it. I kind of knew these ones would do this, so I just handled the finished case. But probably you would handle the progress one as well.
That would be like if you were downloading a large file from a site, maybe.
Exactly, and the way
Okay.
and maybe the way the site does it is to keep a stream open with you and
Mm-hmm.
progressively send the data until you have it, and then it closes the stream at the end, and then like error would pass the whole thing to you with finished.
Would you write a what do they call it? A thread? Is that what it's called when you're writing?
No, you don't need to do a thread. So here's the thing: the only one you really care about for having the data is the finished one. This one is basically just providing you. Well, all right. This one is providing you like the next like the total like data that it has so far,
Mm-hmm.
but most likely you would just like want to say like here's how many bytes I've read, here's the expected size, and print out some like progress bar or percent done. Most likely a percent done.
But eventually you'd get the full file. You don't have to store those incrementals.
Exactly. Eventually, we get the finished
Okay.
card. Yeah. So the official Iris docs, like here on the site, are actually like not bad and go on into detail on it, like on what you can do.
Okay.
But to be honest, this is like most of the functionality that you would want. So we've actually covered pretty much every way that you can need to like communicate, or all of them that you communicate with Earth resources over Mars. For static files, you use file server. For handling incoming stuff, you bind with air and then handle the HTTP response or HTTP request, and then you can call out to Iris, which is fairly straightforward.
That's pretty cool, man.
And if all you want to do is make a simple dynamic generator that doesn't need to do a lot of backend logic, or especially doesn't need to store any state, would probably be the way I would say it. So you want a dynamic generator, but you don't want to store state. You can just serve a generator directly using air, and it has support for that for serving say generators, which is great and pretty straightforward.
Could you serve?
Yes,
Could you
like
serve?
like the answer is yes.
Okay.
But what do you want to serve?
Could you serve a generator? No, I
Mm-hmm.
guess that wouldn't work that way. I was wondering if you could like use the state from from some Gall application to inform a generator.
Um, can you scry with generators? I think you can.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I've
Yeah,
ever
you can
done it, but
scry with.
I
You can
think you
scry
can.
with.
Yeah.
I mean, what's like the simplest scry? What's a freaking here? let me just pull up a sample CY scry.
I know you can
There.
because the generator for trouble scries your
Oh, that's
base
right.
hash.
That's right. Yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm, let me see if I. This one does the CU. Yeah, you can do CU path. So my info. So we'll do it here.
It's the
Yeah, we want to
classic
keep like
ICUP. That's good.
yeah. CUP. Yeah, exactly.
The old iCup.
Why does oh I see because it returns a Lubian. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we can actually use a lot of so we can say like exists CU and then P would be like app slash Mars slash something like this.
What's a CU?
Just same. CU
Oh,
is
to
a
clay.
scry to clay. It's a clay scry to like see if something exists.
Okay.
So let's like serve this guy up again, and this thing just passes like uses a generator to pass a command to hood, which does the same thing. But okay, so we have bound is yes, so I should be able to like. Hmm?
Did you
Oh,
commit that?
I did not commit that. Committing is for losers.
It's true.
It's waiting right here. Doesn't seem to like this. Oh wait, because I typed. Probably is that an error? Yeah, it didn't like something in my. Yeah, it didn't like that quest the what right there.
There we go.
That's not that. There was okay, so it's still getting an error every time I do it. I wonder if I have to like reserve it. Found no.
Oh no, I'd hate to.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure what's mess up one time. That's what you get. So we need to serve. Okay, so now
There
it
we
is
go.
bound. Yeah, it still hates. Does it still hate me? Yeah, I think. Oh no, that's not hatred. But it's still giving an internal server error.
Hmm.
Um, that really doesn't make any sense. Is it just because of this line? I wonder. Yeah, it's just because of that like beautiful scribe that never wanted to hurt anyone.
So something
Oh,
has
but
to
no.
happen there, but
Yeah, I have to look at it, but I'm pretty sure you can scribe based on like exactly what you said, which is like Zod, home, Gen, trouble, like yeah,
it's
there's a
right there.
scry in this is
Yeah.
there's a scry right here, and it's like doing
It's doing the same
same
damn
shit.
thing, right? Right.
Path. Oh, no, path of. Hmm.
Pathify is just so that
So
it can use those kids in home, I think, right?
yeah, yeah. I'm wondering if I have my path weird somehow.
Yeah, because Pathify is just an arm that it's
Oh,
right
oh,
there in
oh,
there.
oh, 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 oh. You know what? I am doing something wrong. So now we will make stuff work because that's what we do here. Um, it would be. I want to do. Wait, you start with ship like ship desk now, right? So it'll be like
Yeah.
home slash like Scott DA now, and then like P dot back like Scott P dot back. I think. Let's see if this works. Oh yeah,
There
exists
you go.
true.
Okay. Cool, man.
And if I should, yeah,
It
and
just
if I
needed the
change the
full path.
name, yeah, exactly. And there we go. Exists false mention. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
sweet.
Okay.
So kind of cool. It's like a worthwhile question. So yeah, I'm gonna add the exercises later.
Okay.
Although to be honest, I think this is like too easy, so I probably will change that since like we literally like just did it during the course of the lesson.
I
So I'll
thought I
think
was
of
gonna get
some
away with
better,
something there,
some
man. It's like, yeah, I
I
can do
know, I know. Let's just quickly. I have to go soon, but let's talk about issues you're having writing the app. So we already talked about like um if you're doing an app that aggregates data from other applications,
hmm
and the data is like already mirrored to your ship,
hmm
like I think scrying is like the default. That's like what you want, and so you're only not kind of scrying on demand if there's some good reason not to, because scrying just like uses memory while it does it. But as long as you don't store anything at the end of it or store little, very little, it's not going to like take up memory in your orbit. That memory will like get released and reallocated. So it's both fast to get a lot of data and also doesn't like cause some huge memory leak or
hmm
space leak.
hmm
The downside of it is if you just have a lot of data that you need to reprocess all the time. And so the reason I didn't do it initially, but now I'm rethinking, is that I wanted to like initially process the entire mailbox
hmm
and categorize the messages by user so that I could
hmm
quickly pull up which things the user do. And this is like pre-computing an index in a database. Um, but the problem is that does complicate the logic significantly. So something just as easy you could do is just scry for all the messages in a mailbox on demand,
hmm
which is almost free from like a speed consideration, even for a very large mailbox. And then what you do is just like um, give yourself a limit for how far back in it you'll go. So just like a month or two or something, or depending on whether you find messages for the user, go back a certain amount. So you can limit how much you process in each of those on-demand scries.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
But what any like issues that you had?
I had one that was weird. I had
Okay.
changed the data that was needed in an action mark in my SIR file, and I did it
Mm-hmm.
in the Gall folder that I had. So I had the like syncing application up and running, and I made a
Mm-hmm.
change in the SIR file, and it was just not registering in the ship. And I actually had to go into the ship's SIR file that had the correct code, but like break it and
Oh,
then restore
dude,
it.
dude, dude. Yeah, yeah. I've had such huge problems with
Okay, so
Sir
that's
files.
not something I was doing. That's just something that happens sometimes.
Yeah, you should ask in the Q&A why that would happen. I'm sure there's like they've Paltham has dealt with this a lot. I'm guessing.
Yeah,
So just go ahead and throw them a question there and ask.
I will.
Um, because and then the kind of thing I usually do is if I'm making a new Sir type, I usually try to like get, or if I remember to, and I'm not stupid, I usually try to get that right and then commit it because there are some weird like ordering things.
Yeah.
And then after I get it right, then I do the next thing. But yeah, that's not you. That's like kind of for jankiness.
Okay. Okay. And then I built something that'll pull the last message from every user, although it does pull the entire mailbox. So now I'm considering how far I really want that to go back. But
So here's the answer. There's a few reasonable ways you could handle it.
mm,
Like one would be um, stop at a certain point. Like if you just don't find it after a certain period of time or a certain number of messages.
hmm
Probably number of messages might be even better.
hmm
Um, and then the other one would just be like for users who take a while to find, just let that query take a while because presumably those are harder cases. Like maybe someone hasn't posted in months
hmm
and you do want to see them. So just like be willing to do that. And then in your front end, just give an indicator as to what's happening and
Oh,
make sure that your processing of it doesn't have any like huge recursion leak that's going to like crash things. But in general,
it
just using
shouldn't.
like using the bar hep for tail recursion, you should be fine.
Okay. Yeah,
So
yeah,
that would be like, so there's like a couple. I mean, honestly, these are all like they depend on you and how you want to implement it. But those are the considerations I would be looking at it. And I regret my choice to kind of cache to handle that, and I'm actually just it's literally on my to dos for next week to just like rip everything out and make it like kind of smarter scries.
yeah. I gotcha.
Um, and actually, okay, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
One more question on that then. I was realizing, like, so what I was building was a map of Pat P's to
Hmm.
um, messages, their last message. So if the map has a message from, so it reads from the most recent backwards, right, and it just finds the last message.
Yes.
What if the last
Yes.
message is non-informative?
Yeah. So there's a few ways to handle that. My kind of default would probably be because as long as you do have some cutoff, like get the last 10 messages,
And then like
or
weld them
or actually
together.
even exactly like so you can just like well as you get each one, add it to an accumulator and then just flop it at the end.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Flopping 10 messages is super fast.
Sure.
Um, and so the other thing you could do is that probably makes even more sense is just make that a parameter to the gate is how many their most n recent messages you want to get or their most n recent within a certain time period.
So see, that's really interesting because I've built a multi-purpose poke action that I think is actually kind of stupid now that I think about it. But basically, what it does is you tell it a path for a chat, and it'll give you either if you give it no additional argument. So the arguments are a path and a unit pat p. And so if you
Uh
give
huh.
it a null for the unit pat p, it gives you a map of everybody's last message. And if you give it a
Uh huh.
specified ship, it gives you the last message for that one ship. But that loses some of the flexibility that you're describing there. So I might revisit that.
Yeah, I think I would. I'm not sure if there's a case where you really want to be returning everyone's last message because it's like a little hard to think of a UI where that's visible. But
Hmm.
it's not like completely crazy. So let me actually just see. 'Cause I'm using like dummy data. Or what is it called? Run dev? I think that's it. Yeah. Oh man, am I not running? It's forwarding that to localhost, so I should have. Well, whatever. Fuck it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. What is it not liking right here? Oh, right, because it wants those things. And then probably I have to log this. Do I have to log this in for this to work? Probably do. Um, does that make sense? Oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense because in the final one it would work fine. Um, okay. So here's like an example of like
Cool.
maybe I could have all like these like groups,
Yeah.
and then I click them, and I show like messages the last week, messages the last month, and then you click them, and then I'm kind of imagining like you put messages down here,
Cute.
right? And then like if you click, and then the ban button shows up if you want to use it.
Very
So
cool.
that's one possible like implementation. Um, that's cool, yeah, and like So, but the point is that I don't know. I don't think there's like a lot of user experiences that would require having all the messages at once. So yeah, but that's pretty normal. Like in the course of like human affairs, you'll just find some folks you don't need, and then you just edit them and delete them.
For sure. Okay. Okay. Trying to think if they had anything else. Uh, Metadata store is where I'm gonna find the connection of groups to chats, right? Because I
That's
was having
correct. You'll
okay,
find
all right,
groups to chats, and also like metadata. Like so, you'll find the name of the group, which will be like the kind of the pretty name, and like the name of the chat, which could differ from like the path to it.
oh, interesting. Okay,
Right, because like like I mean even for example for this chat room like the name is like classroom but it adds on
yeah,
the five six
I
three
don't understand why it does that.
or like the group we don't yeah well no it does it because like if there's a duplicate if there was another classroom where I think now it might just do it by default to
It
avoid
does,
conflicts.
but that's what's weird.
It
Is
just
it's
does it.
like,
Yeah, I think they just want to avoid conflict and there were some of those bugs earlier like where people were losing chats in the transition because the word name conflicts.
okay, okay,
uh, yeah.
okay. Well, I need to investigate metadata store a little more then, because I've been doing most of my work from chat store and group store, and I think it's just I'm at the end of what I can derive from that. So,
Yeah, metadata store is actually pretty critical because you need that to make the link. So it's a pretty easy scry. So you should get the hang of it quick. Oh, there is. I will save you some time there, and be nice. And it's useful to figure it out, but it is kind of annoying. So I should just show you. This is a metadata store. Um, there's a lot of different kinds of scribes.
Yes.
Associations is where you'll find those pretty names,
Okay.
but the one that you really want for these purposes is probably app indices, because that basically lets you pass in, like, say, chat as a parameter and get all the groups and chats and leave out the, like, publish and links.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
So that is like, whereas if you did group indices, it'll give you everything.
Yeah,
So
I don't
app
want that
indices
shit.
is app exactly. So app indices is really nice for that.
Okay. Okay. And one last question then before I let you go. Were you being sarcastic about the parsing of tapes? Because I can see how I might go about doing that by like converting a knot into a tape and then searching for the various
Yeah,
instances of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
fast
Well, you
and
don't need. Yeah, yeah. So you can search for them and then, like, use an accumulator and, like, basically split it into a list, and at that point you have a path.
okay, okay,
Right? Because a path, like, if you do a list of terms or
yes.
of, like, knots, you have a path at that point.
Oh,
So
I
you're good.
see. I
Right
see how you would do
now,
that. Okay.
now, to be honest, that's just such a standard language feature that I'm pretty sure one of these weirdly named, like,
Oh, that aren't
Gates
documented.
problem, like,
Fucking
that
right.
aren't documented, called, like, RUD and RUM and RUF and RUV,
Yeah.
probably does that. So if you want to, like, just also, ask people, like, someone will probably tell you. Let me just see. So they have repetition, softcast by aura, check aura validity, UTF length. This splits the first A characters off
Yeah,
it,
but it's
which
by
is not what you
number.
want.
Yeah.
No, it's stupid. It's stupid. It's like, so literally, like, JavaScript and other languages literally just have, like, a split function where
I
you can
know.
just be like,
I mean,
like,
Excel
if
does.
you put, yeah, 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 like, timluc path example dot split, like, we can just split on the fast and it should just do it. Yeah, it makes a three array like that. So you want that urbit function.
Right.
But what is it called? Who knows? Turf. So these are all conversion stuff, formatting code, format decode.
I'm still not
Anyway, just
totally sure what a
yeah. I
dime or
mean,
a coin is,
so
but
you can write it yourself, or just, like, I probably just quickly ask in, like, the Hoon chat, and someone will give it right away.
I'll see what
It's
I can do.
pretty. It pretty much has to be there.
Okay. Okay, cool. All right, man.
All right, man. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was pretty fun. I'll stop sharing the screen.
Sounds good. Thank you as always, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. All right, talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.